So here's the article. Trans activists mourn Alabama mayor who committed suicide after being outed as a crossdresser who fantasized about murdering women. Now, you can see a picture of him there on the left. He was not publicly out as trans. He was publicly out. It was just he had two lives. He had a public TikTok and Instagram, and as you'll see as we read, he was on erotica sites writing very disturbing triple X rated erotic porn, trans porn. So he had this whole secret life, but people in his town where he was mayor did not know this about him. It wasn't something people in his life knew. It was just an online thing, a secret thing. Shame, right? He's also a pastor. This is why this story particularly angers me. We're going to get into it. Okay, the suicide of an Alabama mayor who was revealed to be fetishistically cross-dressing is being portrayed sympathetically by the media, with the death receiving an outpouring of sympathy from trans activists. Despite the harrowing eulogies, Smith Station Mayor F.L. Bubba Copeland had violent sexual fantasies, including one of murdering a woman and assuming her identity. A woman in his town, by the way. This is some of you who are familiar with this subject will know that among the autogynophiles, this isn't that rare. The autogynophiles are the ones who they don't experience gender dysphoria. It's not that they feel like, oh, I was born in the wrong body, since they were a toddler, which is historically, that's always been gender dysphoria historically was in more men than women. And it was 0.01% of the population, such a small percentage. And it was usually presented when they were toddlers. And it was a feeling like they were born the wrong sex. No, for autogynophiles, it's something later in life. It is a fetish. It is directly related to sex and to sexual fantasy. And they get off on imagining themselves as the opposite sex, and especially moving themselves into spaces for, women's spaces, and forcing you to have to be complicit in their fantasy. I know a lot of people who like within the whole umbrella of people who get called trans now, there are people who say, no, I have gender dysphoria. I've had it since I was a kid. I'm not an autogynophile, and I reject being in the same group as you. You can have your own opinions about these disagreements or not. I'm not telling you what to think about that. I'm just saying this is definitely autogynophile behavior, fantasizing about other women, wanting to be those women, hating those women. This is a common occurrence. We've seen, maybe you haven't, but I've seen posts like this on Reddit and other places where these trans forums where there are autogynophiles in there posting about how obsessed they are with different women and how they hate them and they want to be them and they want to kill them and they want to, and so this guy was like one of those who had fixated on some woman and wrote this pornographic story about killing her and taking her identity. Okay. None of the press, the mainstream press and the gay, the LGBTQ plus, the cult press, none of it is talking about this. What they're doing, you can imagine, is painting this as, look at what transphobia did. Look at what all these crazy, evil, right-wing transphobes did to this upstanding citizen. They don't mention any of his violent sexual fantasies, the stuff he was writing. Let's continue. Okay. On November 3rd, Copeland took his own life using a handgun while being pursued by police on a welfare check. Copeland's public suicide came just days after the 1819 Project. It's actually called 1819 News, is the news outlet. I think they got that wrong. The 1819 News released a lengthy expose on him, revealing that he had been living a double life as a cross-dressing, quote, bimbo, that's his word, bimbo fetishist. Among the revelations were that Copeland operated multiple secret social media accounts in which he utilized the identity Brittany Blair Summerlin. You can see one of his public profiles there, where he describes himself as a transitioning transgender curvy girl that loves smiling, clothes, and shoes. Let's chat. There's the Instagram. On his Tumblr account, Copeland posted transgender fetish content promoting the use of feminizing hormones for men who wish to, quote, become a whore. The theme of bimbofication, quote, bimbofication, extended throughout his online persona, with Copeland expressing arousal and enjoyment at the thought of being reduced to a feminine sexual object for male use. These are the fetishists. These are the autogynephiles. And I'm going to talk about if there I debated whether to talk about this or not, where I think some of this stuff is coming from, but I think I will talk about it. Let's just get to the end of this piece about him. Okay, on Fiction Mania, a self-publication platform for erotic stories, Copeland authored 4 tales centered around becoming a woman. While his first story, titled Becoming Christine, was rated G for lack of graphic content, all of Copeland's subsequent stories were rated XXX. You can see all of his stories under his name, Brittany Summerlin there. Dangerous Obsession, the recruit, a porn story, the transition. Okay. In the 2-part story, The Recruit, Copeland weaves a first-person account about a young man who becomes a, quote, she-male in order to, quote, make it in the porn business. The story opens with Copeland writing, quote, again, this is going to be graphic, so just letting you know, quote, that feels so good, deeper, deeper, hit it, daddy, harder, oh yes. To you, it may seem a bit odd being effed from behind like a dog, but it's my job. Like, you show up to work every day, I do too. However, my job is to be a sexy, hot receptacle for men. That's what these fetishists view women as. Their idea of women it's entirely constructed from their frickin' porn addiction, from the kind of porn they're watching. And they're going beyond watching more and more extreme and taboo and disgusting porn to then wanting, oh, I'm going to become a woman now. I've got to do that to get off. Like, that's what's happening with this dude. In many of Copeland's writings, he presents feminization as being a, quote, sexual punishment. So this is all a sexual fetish for him, or, quote, a bimbo transformation, end quote. These words may not be familiar to you, but they are familiar to me because I have been researching this particular kind of porn that is becoming increasingly popular. And I debated talking about it because I think viewing it is unwise. And especially, I think opening that door, it's like, there's this new kind of porn that is becoming very widespread that is, I think evidence seems to be showing that is causing the men who become addicted to it to eventually be under the spell or the delusion of like, oh, I'm trans too, when it's all just a part of their disgusting sexual fetish and the kind of porn they consume. I have a suspicion that that guy who works for Mr. Beast is one of these guys because of the kind of porn he consumed. And these phrases are very common in it. Sexual punishment, bimbo transformation. There's a lot of stuff about women being receptacles, becoming bimbos, being used. The motivation for transition is described as being for sexual gratification in his story. Yeah. Or in order to increase sexual access for the men he fantasizes about satisfying. But Copeland's fictional exploits took a dark turn in 2021 when he published, quote, his story, Dangerous Obsession. In the story, Copeland describes becoming obsessed with a local business owner who he ultimately murders to assume her identity. The woman murdered in the story is a real individual who lives in Copeland's community. Quote from his story, quote, "I wanted her life." Starting at her on the last social media staring at her on the latest social media application, all I could think about was how amazing it must be to be her, Copeland wrote. At 29 years old, married, and due to gastric bypass surgery, had lost a lot of weight. She looked on top of the world, end quote. Copeland's narration describes undergoing dramatic plastic surgery to, quote, become, end quote, a woman. He then pursues the victim on a cruise ship. After a violent struggle in which the woman screams and cries, Copeland pushes her over the rail of the ship. Before murdering her, Copeland's character steals the victim's wedding ring set. Quote, grabbing her by the left hand, I had to get one last piece of her to complete my plan. Doing her best to fight me, I had to get her wedding set. Those two rings had become the object of my desire, he writes. No one heard a thing, as the real victim's name has been redacted by this article, as the real whatever her name was hit the water, lost forever, because now he's going to assume her identity, right? Copeland's fictional stories have a disturbing similarity to those authored by the designer of the transgender flag. Monica Helms, born Robert Hoagie, who wrote a fictional story depicting a male crossdresser whose wife dies in a violent car accident. After her death, the woman's husband takes on her name, wears her clothing to bars, and participates in random sex acts while pretending to be his deceased wife. That's who designed the transgender flag that's everywhere, the pink and blue one, the little, you know, children's colors. Some of the photos and shared images featured on Copeland's Tumblr blog had a theme of younger boys being transitioned into girls. Again, this guy is being memorialized right now in the mainstream news and the gay news and turned into some national victim of the right-wing boogeyman. And none of this stuff is being mentioned in those pieces, of course. So, okay, the images he was sharing on his Tumblr had a theme of younger boys being transitioned into girls, while the images, which sometimes included photos of actual minors, were non-sexual in appearance. They were passed through, quote, erotica accounts. You can see here, it's a little boy. This is the kind of propaganda in these, the guys, the autogonophiles who consume this kind of porn. This kind of stuff is common in their circles. Look, this was shared on a board for gendererotica. Gendererotica, they're combining those two things, gender identity, transitioning, and erotica. So this is him under his name up there. Brittany Blair shared this. The all-new Cheer Change Academy. Your dreams of being a cheerleader. And they have a picture of a little boy here. A real boy. They found this online somewhere and used it in their disgusting memes. And it's a picture of him, and it says, Seth was miserable in school until one summer he went to Change Cheer Academy. Now Shina, so he transitioned, okay, now Shina is all smiles. Despite Copeland's fascination with gender transition being overtly sexual, trans activists are now mourning his death as being of a trans woman. They're calling him a trans woman. He wasn't. He was a closeted autogonophile and crossdresser. But they're calling him now, posthumously, a trans woman who was involuntarily outed. Yeah, he was involuntarily outed, although he put all the information out there in public. All of these profiles of his were public. The Advocate, one of the largest pro-LGBT outlets in the US, used they, them pronouns in their article announcing Copeland's death, noting that they were concerned with respecting his pronouns. Quote, the Advocate honors people's chosen names and pronouns. Because Copeland did not publicly come out before his death, the Advocate is referring to them as the person they presented publicly. Oh, really? Because if you were doing that, you would be calling him he. The distressing details surrounding Copeland's demise highlight the stark reality. This is from that Advocate piece. The distressing details surrounding Copeland's demise highlight the stark reality of the societal pressures and the often harsh judgments individuals may face when their private lives particularly concerning their sexual orientation or gender identity. Sexual orientation? His sexual orientation was perversion, okay? That was his sexual orientation. Perversion. Don't pretend that this was a gay guy or a trans guy, whatever. This guy was a pervert, a fetishist. I'll continue. Particularly concerning their sexual orientation or gender identity are involuntarily thrust into the public domain, especially in conservative communities. Oh, those big bullies, those baddies, the conservatives. They must be the kind of people who want to keep porn out of their household. The article ends with providing helpline contact information, including for the trans lifeline. The Advocate's article fails to mention that Copeland had fantasies about murdering a woman and assuming her identity. On AL.com, which is a local Alabama outlet, a number of heartfelt statements were made about Copeland, with Cam Moore, the director of Alabama Pardons and Paroles, calling the death, quote, so incredibly sad. I agree, actually. It is so incredibly sad. It is so incredibly sad what happened to this man. What I'm angry about is the way society, the media, these people on the left want to present it, and not getting to the heart about why this guy did what he did, took his own life, what the shame was about, how sick he was, how sick. Every Sunday going to a church and preaching and putting on a freaking shepherd costume, a wolf in a shepherd's costume, leading people astray. That makes me angry. That part of what he was doing, that's sick. And they don't want to talk about it like a sickness. This is why society's getting more sick. They're not talking about his porn habits, his porn use, his murder porn, the young boys in the images he was posting. So this guy says it's so incredibly sad. It is. And he adds, quote, we live in a society where many people are going through so much. Regardless of decisions we may disagree with, we should always love our fellow man as the Bible teaches us. I know firsthand, Ward tweeted. A lot of folks reading this story should look in the mirror. Yes, I actually agree with this. Maybe not in the way you intended, but I do agree with this. A lot of folks should look in the mirror at the things they're doing that they're ashamed of, and the behaviors that are depraved and disgusting that they wouldn't want anyone else finding out about because they're ashamed about it for good reason. And that's true for any addiction, not just porn. I had a lot of shame around my alcoholism. The Lee County Democratic Party chairperson, Jamie Lowe, was also quoted as condemning the, quote, discriminatory and hateful rhetoric, end quote. This is BS. Here's of course, someone I don't agree with. For the other two, I can see what you're saying. This one, no. The discriminatory and hateful rhetoric. What was that? Used to, quote, target the personal lives of individuals, be they public or private citizens. You don't think his congregation, you don't think his constituents had a right to know the depraved stuff he was up to in the public eye online, in his secret life? They didn't have a right to know. They had every right to know. What he was doing to those parishioners in his church is analogous in some ways to infidelity. And the partner has a right to know. And he's keeping that from the people that he's supposed to be a spiritual shepherd for. He's not seeking help, doing the responsible thing and saying, I've got to step down while I deal with this personal problem. Whether he tells them what the personal problem is or not, that's up to him. But taking himself out of that position is the responsible thing to do. But he was abusing those people's trust. And yes, they had a right to know what he was doing to them. The problem is not the newspaper that exposed this guy's depraved behavior. The problem is the depraved behavior. That's what he had shame about. Lowe framed Copeland's secret life as a, quote, personal choice. Yeah, it is your personal choice to be a pervert. And if you're my pastor, it is my business if you're a pervert. And if you're my mayor, it is my business if you're a pervert. As with previous outlets, Copeland's fetishistic murder fantasies were not reported. Oh, I wonder why that is. So you can see here, this is some guy named Zach Lambert on Twitter trying to blame this on the boogeyman of the right, you know, not about the not about the porn, not about the perversion, not about the kinds of stuff this guy was consuming, the underage boys in the photos, the murder porn fantasies. None of that's the problem. Oh, the problem is the people on the right. Read this. These headlines are 2 days apart. On Wednesday, a pastor and mayor in Alabama was outed for secretly dressing in drag. That's how he describes what was going on, secretly dressing in drag. Oh, it opened that. The condemnation was swift and severe. Today, he took his own life. Anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric has deadly consequences. Please join me in praying for his family. I will join you in praying for his family. I will. But the problem here is not some boogeyman of anti-LGBTQ rhetoric. This is a story about a porn addiction and gender ideology being celebrated and accepted in the mainstream and preached, destroying a man and his family and probably a whole community. It is a very sad story. So this article continues. We're at the end, so I'll read this. On Facebook, many progressive activists and local administrators expressed sympathy for Copeland's situation with former Phoenix City School Superintendent Larry DeChera, commenting, "Are you happy now? What crime did he commit? Some of you people make me sick. I hope you're really proud." It's not even worth commenting on that guy's ridiculous indignation. Nobody said he committed a crime. He committed a depraved. He was living in a depraved addiction. And his constituents and his parishioners had a right to know. Copeland is survived by a wife and 3 young children. He had been married for over a decade at the time of his suicide, and I sincerely doubt that his wife knew anything about this, because that's what people do when they're ashamed and they know something's wrong, is they hide it. So I will be praying for his family.